We have a really cool panel, and we also happen to have a really cool audience. There are so many people in the audience that I know that are engaged in just about every dimension of the topic that we're going to come in. So I'm going to try and facilitate quickly a conversation here. And let me tell you who we've got with us. We have got Katarina Fake, just a founder of bunches of companies, one called Hunch, bunches of Hunch, but we have Hunch, Flickr, which I'm so dependent on now today, so thank you for that, and Findery. So through an innovator who has invented 3 companies in 3 different cities, and I'm going to ask her to talk a little bit about that. We have Rob Kitchin, professor and director of the National Institute of Regional and Spatial Analysis at the National University of Ireland at Maynooth. We have Daniel Huttenlocher, who's the dean of the very cool, lots of people have already talked about it, Cornell Tech Campus in New York City. This is one of the big buzz items that's coming already out of CityLab. And then finally we have Teresa Carlson, Vice President of the Worldwide Public Sector of Amazon Web Services. And if there are so many platforms that run on Amazon Web Services that you don't know, it's really remarkable to look at how much Amazon has become the backbone. I won't even mention Amazon's founder in the Washington Post. We'll leave that for another panel. But let me just start. The title of this session is called Creating the Next Tech Cities. And part of me is wanting to, in true Atlantic style, ask why do we need more tech cities? We've got so many as it is. So what is it? Let me start with you, Katarina, because you've been at this from a private sector perspective. But what is important? Why, if all of our mayors here want to become tech cities, what is so special about being a tech city at that point?
Well, I started 3 companies in 3 different cities, as you mentioned, and the first one was Flickr, which was started in Vancouver, in Canada. And
we've got the mayor of Vancouver here somewhere.
somewhere.
Yeah.
And we started that company in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
I started subsequently a company here in New York, which was called Hunch, later acquired by eBay, which we ran for 3 years here before it was acquired. And then subsequently I have started a company in San Francisco,
mm-hmm.
and we've been at it for about 2 years now. It's called Findery. And all of those cities had very different climates for
So did each
technology.
of the cities keep ticking you off about something, and you kept
And I
moving?
kept on moving on.
Yeah.
And I'm the chairwoman of the board for Etsy, also based here in New York, based in Brooklyn and Dumbo. So I have a lot of experience in starting companies as an entrepreneur in these various cities, and all that I can tell a bit about like what it was like in each of those cities.
Mm-hmm.
So in Vancouver has a small tech scene. At the time when we were building it, it was even smaller.
Mm-hmm.
It was highly concentrated in enterprise products, not consumer, which is what I do. I do very consumer-facing products and very social products. My background is in online social community building, participatory media, that kind of thing. That kind of thing is actually very easy to build from anywhere. And Vancouver, we had a team. Our team never got larger.
So we could do it from Tulsa.
You could do it from Tulsa. We had never had a team that was larger than 6 people. But what happened is we grew out of Vancouver, and I think that this is something that it's very very easy to kind of like fund early stage companies, 1 or 2 people, 1 to 6 people, 1 to 12 people, but we scaled out. And what ended up happening with that is that we were acquired by Yahoo. We moved down to San Francisco. This kind of a Canadian kind of brain dream conversation kind of going on a lot of the time. And so we ended up in San Francisco. Subsequently, I initially joined the board of Hunch here in New York City, and then subsequently became the chief product officer there and one of the founding members of the team. And slightly bigger than Vancouver. But the tech scene was still, after having worked in San Francisco at Yahoo for so many years, it seemed like, San Francisco is Rome, mm-hmm. and everything else feels like the colonies. And so you definitely get the sense that even in New York City, right? And I'm a New York City kid, right? So it just seemed like a very small scene to me. And there was Etsy was growing, and Foursquare was growing, and all these companies were growing. So there was the sense of we were starting a scene here. We were at the beginning of something huge. And then
that's important to note that New York used to not have people like you.
Right, and it was interesting because there was a lot of advertising business here, Madison
Right.
Avenue very strong, and yet we were having a hard time finding engineering. This is always the issue if you're starting a company. Where are the engineers? Are the engineers here? I know we're going to talk about
Dan.
this. we're going to talk about this.
Yeah.
And then my latest company has different issues, right? So we're in San Francisco. It's Rome, right? We're here. We're in the center of things. Everything's happening. Everybody knows everybody. It's a thriving tech community. And your challenges there are hanging on to your talent because there's so many options of different places to go. So talent is walking the streets and sitting in every single cafe, and yet you gotta keep them with you.
Well, that was a great explanation there. But which city did you like? Do you like Rome more than the other? Because part of this is not to help Rome, but to help the areas around Rome. And it's hard to think of New York that way, but in a way it is, because you're coming in, Dan, to fill a deficit that is here in this city. There's a lot of buzz about what you're doing, and I think it would be interesting to not only look at what you're doing here in New York City, which has enormous resources, but to begin thinking outside this side. What are the other cities around the country? What are the replicable things? Could every city just hire the four of you, and then design a plan to turn itself into a tech city?
Sequentially, maybe, but not in parallel.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that first of all, Katerina, that was just an amazing description of what's going on in the tech world in a number of cities. I think one of the things that we're seeing in tech, separate from education, is that tech is becoming part of every industry. And so the consumer focus on tech, for example, is one piece of that. But the notion of a separate standalone tech sector, I think, is becoming less and less true. And so that makes big cities places that are the homes of lots of commerce, the homes of lots of nonprofit activities, amazing platforms and places for technology, but with this huge shortage of tech talent. And I think one of the things that we're doing with Cornell Tech, with the new campus that we're building here in New York, is not only trying to fill the talent gap, but recognizing that the kind of talent that we need today in the tech sector is different. So you need those deep engineering, those deep computer science skills. Absolutely, that highly skilled engineer is crucial. But you also need people who have those deep skills and the ability to communicate much more broadly. If you think about the whole sort of more lightweight kind of product development that's happening in startups these days, this calls for a kind of engineer who's much more able to communicate, and for a kind of product manager who's much more technical than you might have seen before. And so there are real changes in the needs. And so the way we're talking about this campus is, it's the first time someone's had the opportunity to really redesign tech education for the information age, for the 21st century. If you look at the educational system in engineering, computer science, it's a product of a previous century, and of a century that was much more oriented toward manufacturing. So I think there's just a huge opportunity here, and it's not just an opportunity for New York. I think the more cities in the country that recognize that...
What's the scale of your school going to be?
So the scale will be... this is a 3-decade scale.
Okay.
But at the 3-decade time period, we will have over 2,000 full-time students, over 200 full-time faculty, and then a fairly large number of other faculty. We're trying to structure this campus in a very different way, where people like Katerina spend time on the campus every day, so that our students and our faculty have a very different experience than the traditional division between, say, the academy and the world outside academia. So it'll be a little hard to count the population. You're still keeping this old world view that you've got to get students together in a specific place, in a specific building. You're not modern yet, thinking people can be... So I would view that we're postmodern.
Oh, you're postmodern? Going back, postmodern?
And I think that, technology in the classroom is fantastic. And in fact, in my academic research hat, I actually do research on MOOCs and other online things. But I think when
you're sitting next to Amazon Web Services, who could run the backbone of all of this, right?
But when you're looking at graduate level education, when you're looking at the kinds of things that are the sparks that start new products, new companies, those things are still happening face to face with small numbers of people who are in very intensive interactions with each other. And those are both the kind of academic programs that we're building, and the reason that we're really excited about New York as this, intensive urban center which really supports highly creative people in those kinds of face-to-face activities.
So Rob Kitchin, tell us all why Dan is only giving us half the picture and is wrong.
Oh, he's not giving you half the picture. I mean, he's giving you a small part of the picture, but obviously...
Not even half. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot.
Much less.
Yeah, so I mean, it's good to be able to have a concentration of skilled, labor creation and so on. But obviously, the wider context is your economic policy, your city and regional policy. How are you going to structure your taxes? How are you going to structure? How are you going to foster innovation? How are you going to foster creativity? How are you going to position yourself in a really competitive labor market? And clearly, over the last 20 or 30 years, we've had a whole series of policies. We had the entrepreneurial city, we've had the creative city, we've had the sustainable city, we've had the resilient city, we've had the smart city. These are all about trying to leverage a particular niche.
Does New York have all of those titles?
It probably would claim to have all of them and more, right? It'd be global city and all the rest of it. So, and different places have taken different strategies. So, I mean, I live in Ireland, I live in Dublin. It's one of the largest software development places in Europe. It works off of a low tax base, higher education, English language, access into the European market. It's not startups, it's FDI, it's foreign direct investment. It's seeking to attract in large multinationals to have their European base there. Somewhere like New York or San Francisco is startups. Somewhere like Bangalore is services. So there are different strategies that different cities can take. They don't all need to be the startup capital of wherever they are. And so there are different ways into this. And obviously, as you say, tech is this massive spectrum of different kinds of services across every kind of industry. So for me, it's about the broader contextualization of the policy that's going to help shape that. And helping startups is one part of it. Having your education and your skills base is another part of it.
So is there kind of a manual out there? I was thinking this morning about this panel and how to make it fun, and I thought if we really had all of Mike Bloomberg's wealth, what would we do to go out and make this a fun project? And I decided we should have a TV show, sort of like, instead of fixing a home, you go in and fix Tulsa, or go and fix cities and sort of show what you can do in 60 days. But when you obviously you can't do it in 60 days, but it does raise the kind of question that you just did, Rob. In what if you walk into a typical, not one of the Richard Florida top 100, but let's take the Richard Florida bottom 100 cities that just aren't pulling it together. What do you think are generally, as you look at it, the 2 or 3 things that are most important? And I would think maybe the tech dimension is part of it, but to modernize, to turn themselves around. Before I jump to Teresa, because I think she has all the answers. Amazon has all the answers.
I think part of it was in the panel previously. It's about getting some of the fundamentals right, and about realizing that the city is really diverse, and we have, we were saying people not on living wage, and it's about trying to structure an economy that can try and create wealth and lift all boats on the tide, right? Mm-hmm. And we've not been very good at that. We've been very good at transferring wealth to the very rich. We talked about the rising income gap and so on. So it's about having a diversified economy, not just chasing one sector. Mm-hmm. It's about trying to get your educational strategies. It's about, I would say, about creativity, innovation, openness, transparency. It's not about command and control. It's not about very heavy-handed management and so on. But at the same time, that's probably needed in some cases to sort out particular problems, right? But it's very difficult to come up with a one-size-fits-all. I mean, one of the things we have to realize is cities are really different places. We're not going to have a one solution fits all, take it out of a box. We can fit this to every city like a cookie cutter. Cities have different histories. They have different skill sets. Mm-hmm. They have different sets of diversity, and so on. And it's trying to work out which bits of it you can maximize and which bits of it need to be kind of sorted out in other ways.
Thank you, Teresa. In not just with Amazon, but just as you look at this whole question of reinvention, and also I know your company pretty well. How what your company has done is really remarkable in the sense that it gives small players, the Katarina Fakes when she was just starting out, maybe you didn't literally do this, but the hypothetical next category.
We're on Amazon Web Services.
Okay, good. But you give them essentially an opportunity to be big very quickly. You can give the small players an opportunity to be big. You give them scale. You give them a lot of capacity, and that's a really big game changer, I think, because when you look at corporations, and one of the rules of gravity in companies is, with maybe the exception of Hitachi, is, or maybe Hitachi is an example of it, I don't know. Sorry, guys, but the bigger you are, the less risk-taking you are as an institution. I know you're like, look, maybe that's true, maybe not. But small players who have invented scale can take those risks. And I'm interested. I'm going to go to this gentleman to give him an opportunity to kind of dispute what I just said. But how do you see it?
Well, I think Katerina really gave a great example of how many small businesses start out. I mean, her example is really the trend of what's going on. We know that 75% or more of startups utilize Amazon Web Services. And why? Because they can scale. So they don't need a lot of cash to get going. They can put all their money into really designing and monetizing their solution and getting it out there. And then they can scale up, scale out, scale down as they need. And it really is perfect for cities. And as you create innovation, and I loved what Mayor Bloomberg said on the stage earlier, because I think he's so spot on about you can't, innovation just doesn't happen. Failures are a big part of innovation. And one of the things that we really work with our customers on is the ability you can fail fast. And when you have a technology tool that enables you to fail fast, but the key is you can use those failures to understand the successes that you need to really drive to the next level. So startups, I love talking to new young entrepreneurs and startups because they talk about how they're really creating their business model and their technology. And also, you can't separate IT from a business anymore. I mean, you look at everybody says, oh, what's your IT budget? Well, you can't separate IT from mission anymore. They're really one and the same. And but the phenomenon that's really happened is the enterprise. Mm-hmm. And then if you take the opportunity is for all these young startups that get going that can work from a city to a large country to a large enterprise. I try to tell every central government and small government that look at the new young companies that are out there, because that's really key. You can take advantage of new, really cutting edge technology that you maybe had never thought about in the past.
And are there cities that you see doing that really well? Is it, the intersection between that enterprise sector, that new innovative crowd, and cities trying to position themselves or trying to actually, from a policy perspective, position themselves better as the next tech city?
Well,
what do you advise them?
There's a really small, it's not small, but Oakland County, Michigan has created this whole, this managed service offering where they're putting out backup and recovery, SharePoint as a service, storage as a service. They're sort of white labeling Amazon Web Services almost. So they're taking it to the next level because they said, hey, we really want to be able to offer both our citizens as well as other small communities around us solutions. So they're going to white label that and make it a managed service offering and sell it to other, and not just sell, but help support. I mean, really one of their goals, and they call it G to G. So government to government. And then also I was just in Singapore about 3 months ago, and we made an announcement with Singapore, which I know Singapore is a country, but they think about their city, right? Their ports, their entries, their trade, their financial districts. And one of the things that they're doing is they're going to train 200 new SaaS providers to how they utilize cloud computing to be able to innovate faster and create solutions that will help both Singapore and the region around them. Right. Because what you were just talking about earlier was they want to create a regional model that supports not only their local government, but how do they bring in others and make others really excited about what they have to offer. So those are two good examples, but there's so many, I could sit here all day and tell you about so many innovations going on.
Katerina, you want to jump in?
Oh, I mean, Amazon Web Services, just to give some credit, actually transformed startups. I really do believe that it did. We may still be in Vancouver if it hadn't been, if Amazon Web Services had. I mean, to give you an idea, we literally had the personal cell phone number of the customs agent who was flying Dell servers up from the U.S. We would drive down to Burnaby, grab the server, run to the co-location center, plug it in, I mean, it was nuts, and it was very difficult to do a startup. And now
those were the days.
Those were the days. And now, you're a startup. You can do it over like a hack weekend and start a company.
All you need a credit card, swipe it, and you're good to go.
You're ready to go. So that's a huge transformative thing for businesses everywhere.
I want to go to the audience in a moment, but one question I have, I was picking on Hitachi for a minute just for fun, but I mean, when you think about what we're becoming, what we're sculpting in the future, what we're doing with cities and ourselves, and you think that, a company like Hitachi or other large infrastructure firms, they're building everything. Everything has sensors. Your kitchen will talk to you. Your elevators will know when you're coming. We're going to have cities with everything and an internet of everything. And in that next real big leap in which everything is monitored, measured, connected, machines are connected and talking, what is the requirement of the human being in that space and place in a city, and how does that manage? Because I get the sense that the way we're still talking about cities in general is a very archaic, somewhat anachronistic form. And I sort of look at when you go into the deep guts of a company like Hitachi, and I'm not trying to, you really do see people planning a very, very different future, very different kinds of infrastructure, and there's a bit of a lag effect that I think some of us represent. So as you look into the future, what is going to be the dynamic then? Is everyone going to have to be a Katarina fake just to make their way through that world?
I hope not. I mean, I think that the all of the devices that we've got that we're carrying everywhere, the mobility that is increasing, all of this, I really do believe that, tech itself is undergoing transformations as well into mobile devices. And, my kind of great project, I consider it kind of my the reason for my career is to make technology more human, to bring people back to themselves, to bring people back to the places where they live, to the people around them. And as we all know, technology can be a very alienating, depersonalizing, dehumanizing experience and remove you from the world. And so I really think that, there's a great movement, kind of away from that. There's a lot of people want to connect with fewer people. We had this kind of great rash of very promiscuous connection, and now we're drawing back.
I'm trying to shrink my 5,000 friends to 100. On Facebook.
Which I think is important. And also, one of the main components of that is actually location. And location becomes hugely important in technology where mobile is, the default of.
And I would say location also becomes incredibly more important in the urban context. I think one of the sort of promises of the internet was that it was going to make location irrelevant, that everybody would be able to communicate regardless of where they were. But that sort of led to this very sort of promiscuous kind of friending, because if there are no constraints on who you're interacting with, suddenly the number becomes too big for anybody to work with. And there are these, anthropologists know a lot more about this than I do, but I mean, there are these sort of size communities that people can naturally interact with. And you may be able to naturally interact with a few of those communities, but you can't have deep interactions with arbitrary numbers of people. And so one of the things that I think we're seeing is this increasing urbanization of tech and how people use tech, because the urban context or the spatial context is becoming important again. So it's not just location, as something that can sell you better ads or whatever. It's location as part of that experience, part of that repersonalizing technology that I think that Katarina mentioned that I think is really important.
Rob, Therese?
I was just going to say that some of it's not going to be through choice. You'll have no choice but to interact with how the tech has been embedded into the city. So, ubiquitous computing, pervasive computing is being put into the city, whether it's sensors, whether it's automatic toll booths, whether it's building management systems that react. I don't have light bulbs. I don't have light switches in my office. The building makes the choices for me whether the lights come on or off, and it does weird things like open the windows when it wants and so on. So I don't have any choice on those fronts. And then there are things where we do have choices, where we can say, I don't want to use social media, I don't want smart devices in my home and so on. And if you go and do audits of people's homes, and you can go and do audits of your own home or your work or where you travel and so on, people are remarkably different. So you can go to some people's homes and everything's analog. They've never felt the need, they don't have a computer, they don't have a anything smart in there or techie.
Anybody all analog here?
I'm pretty analog except for
you're-
the internet.
Oh, uh-huh.
Myself. I know people who don't have mobile phones. I know people who try not to use credit cards. They don't want to be tracked and traced through their purchases and so on. They don't sign up for loyalty cards. They don't sign up for, so there are some people who actively resist.
Do they live in
There's
a
some
cave?
No, they don't. They live perfectly normal, happy lives. You don't have to be buying Amazon services to be alive.
Yeah. Teresa, what do you think about that?
Wow, okay. Well, I just have I have a couple of, I think, fun examples of how you can get citizens to participate. Really, I think the interaction, the social part of it, if you can get your citizens to really engage, or your students, and learn from them and let them learn from you. And two quick examples. In fact, somebody just texted me and said, oh, they talked about this at the Gartner conference opening, which I'm headed to next. But the speed bump. So there's a speed bump app in Boston that you literally you can download the app, you put it on your dashboard, and when it hits a bump, and it knows the difference between, it's got the algorithms already built in, so it knows if it's just a pothole. So after 3 times of hitting that pothole, it knows it's a pothole and that they should go take care of that pothole. So that is sort of a sensor, and some people don't like those kinds of things, and you can decide if you want to use them or not. But that's one example. The city of Philadelphia uses like an iWatch. Is anybody here from Philadelphia or Boston, as I talked about, to get the citizens to participate in a crime watch, essentially, if they think there's a crime scene going on, or they want to be able to report something like that. And there's just numerous examples. Esri is a partner of ours, and I was just down listening to some of the solutions built on Esri. And if you think about geospatial was a little bit old school for a while. I was like, yeah, but now it's amazing, because if you look at any business model, geospatial is part of that. It's embedded in that. And I was listening to the Meister of the Bavarian forest, one of the forest meisters, talking about, they use geospatial to track every deer and every tree. And it is amazing, because I think the one thing it brings to bear is, again, getting the citizens to engage and making them feel like they're part of the process.
Thank you very much. I think, just to wrestle with my first question would say, why do we need more tech cities? It seems to me that the answer is very clearly, I would probably disagree, Rob, that the costs for rejecting that process for a city at a city level are staggeringly high today, because you throw your community, the infrastructure, all of that, and relegate it to a slow growth or no growth dimension that really is. So I don't know if there are people in the audience that feel differently, but it looks to me like that it is almost a deterministic requirement for it. But yes, right here.
Well, you started to say.
Mic, we're on camera, so there we go. This is my friend from Hitachi.
Hi, Brian Levitt with Hitachi Consulting. You started to say kind of what I was going to say. You talked about Hitachi before as being a super big company. We are. Hitachi Limited has 940 smaller companies, of which I'm part of one of.
And you're the fun part, right?
Exactly. We get to do the most fun work. But what you just said is exactly why we are risk averse as a huge multinational corporation. But risk averse means we can't afford not to be innovating, which you just the same thing with the cities. And that if we are not, if you'll see out on the sponsorship signs, is Hitachi Inspire the Next. If we are not inspiring the next technology, the next smart city, we'll soon become just some old big manufacturing company. So one of my questions to you folks is, our biggest challenge in Hitachi is coordinating all these different technologies and services and knowledge bases to come together and provide new and valuable and exciting services. One of the infuriating things I saw on the subway today as I was coming in from my home in Brooklyn, which I see every time I ride the New York City subway, is this horribly inefficient T12 lighting that is wasting millions of dollars of New York taxpayer money every year. Not only could Hitachi replace that all this year, we would pay to do it. But getting those discussions.
You would pay to do it?
Yeah, we have a new financing mechanism where we can basically pay for any project, and it doesn't look like debt, and it's really exciting. So we're hoping to do that with more cities.
Turn this into a deal-making.
Yeah, so a little bit of a plug. If anyone wants to talk to me, we'll pay to upgrade your energy systems. But how can businesses and universities and how can you better reach the cities and the other folks to make those connections so that there's not a lot of missed opportunities?
Great. So the mixed opportunity gap. Dan, Quick answers, really fast.
So I think one thing that we're trying to do and that we think is very important is demonstrations. And that's a place where universities, we think, can play a real role. We have these, the great thing about students is they don't know what's impossible yet, and so they just don't believe anything's impossible. And so we're already working closely with a number of companies here in New York to do demonstrations of things, and then I think you have to then prove that they really scale outside. But the point of these demonstrations is to do demonstrations on problems outside the classroom, outside academia, in partnership with companies.
Others, Teresa?
Can I just, we're launching something called City on a Cloud. We believe this is such an important area of getting people to learn and understand from each other. We also have something called an Amazon Web Services Marketplace, but I really want to break it down to the city and the government. So we're doing something called City on a Cloud. So it's just a test drive site, and we really just want people to go up there and share their solutions. What's working? It's a way, again, to sort of participate and crowdsource towards something and talk about, is it working or not, or do you have a different idea? Because the thing is evolving these. You don't want anything to stay stagnant. You want it to be evolutionary.
Hi, I'm Jane Lute from the Council on Cybersecurity and recently left government. I have a question for the panel. We understand a lot about people by virtue of their being online. We actually understand a ton, but we understand them almost exclusively as consumers, not as citizens. So when you talk about cities in a cloud, I mean, that might suggest we want to learn more about you as citizens. I think the public is skeptical whenever private sector entities take on, ask more about us. We think you just want to know more about us as consumers. I'd like the panel to speak to that a little bit. How do we take what we know about people as consumers and translate that into an understanding of them as citizens?
Interesting question.
I look at this issue a lot as a person who builds online communities, which is an interesting place to be, and the thing that we've generally concluded from being in the social media space and participatory media and all that kind of thing is that the online world, the offline world are reflections of each other, but they're very different in some ways. There is a very strong suspicion of social media participation as a vehicle for commercialization and using your information for commercial purposes. And my last company, Hunch, was actually very much about kind of giving control back to the consumers, and was very much about personalization as an opt-in kind of thing. And what we actually discovered was people were very reluctant to do that the services that people were providing for free were much more attractive to them because they were, there's this kind of cliche that, if you're not paying, then you are the product. And the product is you, and you're being sold to your advertisers, you're being sold to all these kinds of people. And, for better or for worse, this has become the common practice on the internet. Now, we had a different way of doing this with my first company, Flickr, which is that people would pay, and it seems kind of an odd thing to do, but they would pay not to see ads. They would actually pay a subscription service. They would pay not to be advertised against. It was actually a very different model from most of the models that you see out there with some of the biggest social media companies. There are very strong, desires for people to own their own data but it's a very small percentage of the population, surprisingly small, I would say, who are reluctant, who would actually pay for a service rather than keep their information private. So that's the dilemma that entrepreneurs in technology especially are working with.
I think it's a really important question. I don't know if we have time. I almost, as I think about it, wonder if there isn't an inverse responsibility at some level where government and those that we've empowered to sort of be the stewards of our system aren't using themselves more of the methodologies to explore the connection and interests of citizens. And, it would be a very interesting challenge to do that.
Just a very quick anecdote. When the Europeans came from Washington for a routine update of a big agreement they had with Homeland Security, it was right after Snowden. The Europeans were understandably angry about a lot of things, and they said, you're treating us as second-class citizens. I said, that's really not your best argument. Your best argument is you're being treated as second-class consumers. Yeah. And so things are being turned on their head.
Interesting. Yes, right here.
I wanted to pick up on the comment you made earlier about everything being connected and the
Right.
trace, et cetera. My name is Anne Kavukian. I'm the Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, Canada. And what we encourage companies to do, we work with companies all the time. Tech is the way of the future, and everyone is for it. But often there is this zero-sum perspective that it's technology or innovation versus privacy, and that somehow these are opposing forces. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Privacy fuels innovation. It takes a lot of creativity to embed privacy into the design of technology. But when you do that, you get the buyback, you get the thanks, you get so many rewards in terms of a privacy payoff. So we developed something called Privacy by Design, which is all about embedding privacy into the design of information technologies and business practices. We've worked with all the major companies and shown how it can be done. Microsoft, HP, Intel, Google, Yahoo, love to work with Amazon. So we
And you've
want
done this in Ontario.
we have it around the world. It was
Well-
made an international standard in 2010. So Privacy by Design has been translated into 31 languages. It's everywhere. We work very closely with your FTC here, and we were just at the Pentagon. They're very interested in it because it's all about the and. Get rid of the versus. Get rid of the one or the other. How do you do both? Because to me, the notion of it's not. Sorry, and I say this with great respect, I don't want you to decide what to do with my information. I want the consumer, the citizen to decide. And if you make privacy the default setting in your offerings, then you can offer privacy assurance in this time of very distrustful public, especially here in the United States. For the first time ever, 6 out of 10 Americans value privacy and civil liberties higher than public safety and security.
I
That's
believe
a first.
you. I believe you. Thank
So
you.
I would love a
Okay.
response from your
Yeah, so
panelists.
I'm going to do a quick response, Dan.
So I was just saying, I mean, I think in general, the technology systems that we build and that get adopted have huge consequences for the way we live our lives. Privacy is one of them, but there are others. I actually think, back to your point earlier, I think there are also just implications about how people live their daily lives. That, you know, for example, do systems encourage good citizenship and good neighborly behavior, or do they encourage bad citizenship or bad neighborly behavior? So I think it's a responsibility of all of us, not just the tech community, but all of us broadly in government, in industry, in academia, to be taking these things into
Got it.
consideration.
Let me go to this gentleman in the far back. Just scream it out.
You don't want me to do that, believe me. I wanted to ask Daniel actually a question, an economic development question, specifically about the Cornell Tech campus. It strikes me that it's a bit problematic that it's actually on an island. It's on the south tip of Roosevelt Island, and when we're thinking about institutional development and how optimally, ideally, an institution would be physically embedded in a community surrounding it, and that's why, organic or not, or whatever, SMEs would feed off of it, I guess. So given, let's say, the spatial constraint that it's, and spatial severance that it's on an island, what are some ways, either design-wise or programmatic solutions to deal with this? And yeah, just curious.
So our site's about a 12-acre site on Roosevelt Island. And one of the things that we're doing is we're designing a very different kind of physical campus than most university campuses. So for each academic building that we build, we're actually pairing that with a corporate building. A building that will have co-working space for small companies that might spin out with our students or our faculty or others, but also space for larger companies to have innovation centers and kind of externally focused activities that engage with our students, with our faculty, but also with the technology and business community more broadly. So our goal is to make the campus a hotspot for tech kinds of activities and not just for academic activities. Now, that said, you know, the number of jobs on our campus will be limited by the fact that it's a 12-acre site. And even with the density that you might build in New York, that's still not a huge number of businesses that we can support right there on the campus. So we're also working quite a lot, both with the city and with private groups in Western Queens. The Long Island City area is one that's you know, seeing a pretty big resurgence these days, but still, compared to a lot of other parts of New York, has an abundance of real estate that really could support a large development of companies. So we think that building that kind of virtuous cycle of everyday engagement is something that we can easily get with Long Island City. But we also plan to have companies right there on the campus, right as part of what we do every day.
So we need to bring this to a close. Katerina, I'm going to give you a chance in just a second. But what I'm hearing, which is interesting, is that space and being there and having people meet, particularly when you think about the reinvention towards a tech city, really does continue to matter. That the technology platforms we have there give a lot of empowerment to players out there, like in the case of Amazon services. But the future of the city still, in a way, you're doing what Stanford did in Palo Alto, right? Then you have that built around. A lot of other cities are trying to.
Except it's in a great city instead of a big suburb.
Yeah, big city instead of big suburb, right? So, but that is part of maybe the template of replicable things that cities trying to reinvent themselves might consider doing. Katerina, last comments and questions very quickly.
Well, what I wanted to say was that I really do believe that entrepreneurship does not succeed well in the, kind of the institutional education system, the factory model, as Dan was saying, but it's more of an apprenticeship model. If you go back to an earlier form of education when people had apprenticeships, there's a few people who know how to do things. Things are changing constantly in technology. By the time it gets to your textbook, it's completely out of date. And so really the thing that Cornell, and other universities and other cities who are interested in doing this is really bring people in, have, partner with existing startups, internships, programs, speaker series, all of those kinds of things that are actually a permeable membrane, so that you don't have the groves of academe with, kind of like the closed, and so you actually have a very kind of fluid faculty, a very fluid, lecturers and speakers and apprenticeship models and all of those kinds of things really is the important part.
We have
of
about 15 seconds each for the next three. Rob?
I was just going to say the same kind of thing, like the informal and the formal networks are really important. Clustering and agglomeration is really important, like starting to build scale and links and so on. And the links between the civic, the educational, government, and business, and being able to have those transactions across is actually quite important, rather than them all existing in their own silos, thinking they've got their own specific jobs.
Thank you. Dan?
So I think strong talent in the tech industry increasingly wants to be surrounded by strong talent in other industries. And so you're seeing an urbanization of tech. If you look at San Francisco now as a city and its role in Silicon Valley, it's changed radically in the last 15 years towards a lot of emphasis on the city over the rest of the valley. So I think this is something for mayors and staff in big cities to think about, that this is an urban phenomenon today.
Interesting. Teresa?
One of the most exciting things I get to do is work with K through 12 in higher ed, and we are essentially working with them to transform their curriculum so that it shouldn't matter if you're in a very small town or a very large city or an urban area or a suburban area. You can take advantage of classes and curriculum and learn how to develop an architect with these new technologies. And you can crowdsource through programs, these MOOCs like edX and Udacity and Coursera and Tutor and all these different ones. It's a very exciting time for education, and I think it's a very exciting time for our students because they can learn from each other in a greater world. So,
thank you. I'm ready to have a Cornell Tech campus in the middle of DuPont Circle in DC. So,
I like that idea.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, please thank Teresa Carlson, Daniel Huttenlocher, Rob Kitchin, and Katerina Fake. Thank you so much for joining us.